the 17th century invented models like laboratories, like Kunstkammer, or atlases, books, just to try to help to tackle, to gather, to take into your hand those problems. So nowadays, if you don't do that, one of the ways to do that for the Anthropocene or for the climate change is to create new models, to create new images.
The research that currently, I think, has the biggest potential to really alter our life is really how food affects our health. That is how, through the food that we eat on a daily basis, we modulate our cellular network, and that leads to health or disease. And the reason why I think that this could be transformative, and this will be transformative, is because really we are what we eat. And really much of the health effects that we're seeing around the world is determined by eating patterns. And the complexity, the chemical complexity of the food is not understood. And I think we're in a fabulous path towards really understanding that and making a big impact.
Our world is based on this idea that knowledge is property, it cannot be shared, you either have to pay or ask permission. So that's one issue. The second issue is just the opposite, is that those things that are finite, we think they're infinite. So this is the material world. So we have a planet with limited resources, with limited energy, etc. But we have been behaving for 400 years as if it's like an infinite resource, and we also dump it as if there is an infinite waste dump at our service. So those two things go together. And I would say the third issue is also, of course, that the results of this are also very unequal and unjust society.
Both human and non-human animals experience the world through encounters, collaborations, conflicts, and bonds of affection. In the words of philosophers Sue Donaldson and Will Kymlicka in a wonderful book called Zoopolis, A Political Theory of Animal Rights, they argue that the first thing that humans must do is recognize that animals are trying to communicate. We must then be attentive to individual repertoires, such as vocalizations and gestures, before responding appropriately. It is, in other words, a dialogic, co-created exchange, since the animals in our lives must know that attempts to communicate with us are not a wasted effort. As a result, interspecies relationships can be complex, rich, fulfilling for all parties. Love, that most intimate, that most vulnerable emotion, is itself a coup de foudre. It is ungovernable. By being open to otherness, we might find ourselves finally edging towards becoming fully or truly companionate species.
There are so many articulate and powerful movements that are active. We don't have a crisis of imagination. We just need to figure out how the movements can take power and shift policies and institutions so that we can have a survivable planet that's more just.
Companies also have an influence on the data we use to evaluate newly developed AI algorithms. A good example is the so-called Cityscape dataset that was partially created by the car manufacturer Daimler. Here the task for the algorithm is to recognize objects like cars, bikes, and pedestrians in images. The Cityscape dataset is used in more than 3,000 research papers. That's a lot. Many of them written by publicly funded researchers that by evaluating their algorithms on this dataset kind of contribute to research that can be used for self-driving cars. In my opinion, there are only a very limited amount of company that will benefit from this kind of research in the future. Okay, somebody might ask, why do these researchers just not use another dataset? Unfortunately, it's standard practice in AI research to compare algorithms on the same datasets. So if a dataset is once established, it's difficult not to use it.
Future shock is an event in which the rate of technological change outpaces our psychological ability to adapt. While long-term, humans are able as a species to overturn their most basic values, in the short run, a future shock can be such a challenge to the nervous system as to cause a fight, flight, or freeze response. When fear and adrenaline are high, our decision-making capacity is much damaged, and our brain becomes quite nostalgic. Instead of analyzing available data, it draws on the reservoir of past behaviors to choose the most suitable one. That reservoir is personal and often flawed, and again, can't be the ground for projects of future-centered design.
The dataist is steering the human in the form of data sequences, info processes, through algorithmic mantras. Along the way, it sheds excess human baggage. It jettisons the messy, the wobbly. It chucks out the carnal bits. It morphs into a self-driving data synthesizer, a smart vehicle that is heading towards a state of superintelligence.
How can you get rid of something you immediately depend on, but which in the longer term will be killing you somehow? Of course, the us, you here has to be entirely discussed, but still, there is some truth here within this paradox. So we have to understand immediately how we may inherit those infrastructures we cannot get rid of for the lives of billions of people, and at the same time, which we have to disaffect and reaffect, we call disaffect and reaffect very quickly, in order not to get rid of them in a quite theoretical manner, but a very, very practical manner, because our whole survival, entire survival depends on that. So we have to learn new knowledge about how to do that, and this is not something we are accustomed to.
Because the commons and whatever we call the public has been engaged in a very serious struggle against business and financial interests that were all about extraction and exploitation, and have been long divorced from any concept of public good. And this process has also been accompanied, let's say, by a large-scale desensibilization. I think we have been actually engineered, I'm going to use this term, engineered to be egotistical, competitive individualists, and we've been simplified in our pleasures and our goals.
Social changes and all about technology. So I really believe that in this new world, technology is a tool, it's necessary, but it's not what's going to make us change. And what's going to make us change is the way we interact with each other. It is the way we cooperate with each other. So cooperation, more cooperation, better cooperation, cooperation with benevolence towards each other is obviously the way, in my view, we should look at the future.
The apocalypse is already here. Pandemics, climate change, deadly asteroids, atomic war, aliens. That is only some of the scenarios. But the scenarios for saving humankind are considerably fewer. And even fewer are something more than just the search for shelter elsewhere in the cosmos. And these shelters are mostly the replicas of Earth and human history. It is as if we haven't learned anything from the crises we've caused. If we want to survive, or at least properly celebrate the end of humanity, we as Earthlings must to escape such a terrestrially biased thinking and imagination. How do we go about it?
I think a major challenge in the coming years is a reinvention of the social and political institutions needed to address those kinds of questions. That's not easy to envision, given how corrupt actually many of the political systems are, certainly in the United States, how beholden to major corporate interests and major money the political system is, and given the extent to which so much energy in the political system goes into protecting it from meaningful reform. But I think the crisis is actually the asynchronicity between the historical inheritance of our institutions and the new technologies that are affecting the commonwealth and affecting social life in ways that we don't yet know how to regulate.
To overcome the accumulated crises, there needs to be a profound change in the organization of enterprises. They have to stop being autocratic. They have to stop being undemocratic. They can't anymore have a tiny group of people who use the enterprise as a way of enriching themselves. It has to be democratic. One person, one vote, make the decisions. If the people had to make the decisions, they will not destroy the environment because they have to live in it.